is here. We are continuing our conversation with Lynn and Janene Buckles. Lynn had great health, but then all of a sudden started feeling bad, and next thing you know, he's had a major surgery. He's had a ruptured esophagus, 10% chance of surviving the surgery. Thankfully, he did, but unfortunately, he had to go through 4 more surgeries after that, lost 45 pounds, and even had to learn to walk again after being on a feeding tube for over 4 months. However, thankfully, with God's grace, great doctors and nurses at St. Joe, a loving wife and family and friends, and especially their church family, he's made a full recovery. This happened back in 2016, November of 2015, and he was able to go home February of 2016. But man, I really want to encourage you, if you didn't hear our first 2 programs, only 14 minutes long, you can catch a copy of the podcast at our website, hopeishere.today. That's hopeishere.today, and just hear about this incredible story of healing, and you'll be really blessed. Today I want to get on the faith side. You've gone through some incredible physical obstacles and challenges, and yet you're finally able to go home, Lynn, and you're in ministry. You're a spiritual growth leader at Crossroads. You've been in ministry over 20 years. Talk to us about how your faith helped you have hope throughout this whole just tremendous physical ordeal.
Yeah, so thank you, Greg. Being now in my 60s, I'm in a stage of life where I'm much more reflective, about things. So you're thinking about what happened almost 4 years ago and some of the days after that when I got out of the hospital, but even in the hospital when I was able to think clearly. Before this happened, I'd always wondered, would my faith sustain me in the midst of knowing I was dying? How would I react? If I was told I had cancer, which I was actually told I had cancer the year before this. I had prostate cancer, but they caught it early, so I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be an issue as far as, terminal or anything like that. But in this situation, you kind of, okay, what would happen if I heard that kind of news? And so looking back on that, as I mentioned before, when Dr. Halpin looked me in the eye and said, here's what's going on. And now, part of that, I was pretty weak at the time, but I do remember in my spirit, I was not horrified. I was concerned. You're not used to hearing people tell you you're probably going to die. So that was an alarm. But I felt like for me, being a guy who's typically anxious and can be fearful, I didn't really feel a lot of that. Now, for Janene having to watch me almost die multiple times, all of that's a different ballgame. I'm just saying from my side of things. So after the first surgery, going into other surgeries, I just never felt horrified or like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me? I did feel anxiety at times, partly because I didn't know when I was going to get out of the hospital. I didn't know where this thing was going. At times feeling, like I say, lonely. Other times feeling really hungry because I couldn't eat, and Janene would walk in, others would walk in. My daughter would walk in with Chick-fil-A, and the smell of those nuggets and everything else just drove me crazy. But I don't know how I would have made it without a real faith in Christ. I don't think I would have done well emotionally or mentally, obviously spiritually. But I think it was just seeing God at work. I saw God at work a lot, even through the medical staff. There were times I got to pray with staff. I had made a commitment when I was in there, and I've always kind of had this sense of when I'm around medical people, when I go to see a doctor, I want to be as respectful as I possibly can, because I had seen people not be the way. And I remember being on the hospital floor, sometimes hearing patients yelling. Now, they may have been in incredible pain, so I don't know their context. But I remember coming out of, after my last surgery, they promised me they would put me back in the same room on the 3rd floor. I didn't believe they could do that. They would say, we're going to hold your room for you. But no, they can't do that. I get back in my room after being in the ICU for 4 days. And one of the certified nursing assistants, real sweet young lady, came in and said, Mr. Buckles, I'm so glad you're back. There was an old man in this room before you got here, and he was mean to me. And it just reminded me that as a Christian, even when I'm in a place of challenge and not at my best, it's no excuse to mistreat people. And so I tried really hard when I was alert to encourage nurses. I mean, I have people come in at night, nurses at night, late night, and we did have conversations about spiritual things. I didn't bring it up. They'd bring it up. And we had some nurses who were kind of newer to the floor, and they were younger, and I would encourage them and ask them about their families. My surgeon, he's a thoracic surgeon, busy all the time. He would often come into my room at night after being in surgery all day and just literally sit down, and we would talk about family. And I'd say to him, "Why don't you go on home?" He said, "No, let's just sit here and talk." And I felt like it was a reciprocal thing. Like I was actually, he wanted to be with me just as not just as a patient, but he cared for me deeply as a doctor for his patients. But I don't know. That was important to me. And looking back, I'm thankful God gave me the grace to do that, because some days I don't necessarily want to do that. I'm just not feeling well. But to try to be as gracious as I could in light of the circumstances. So faith was everything. Great surgeons, great skill. There was several prayer gatherings throughout. Well, every week in Richmond, they prayed Sunday morning as a community. But in particular, right before Christmas, I was told there was a gathering of all of our campuses. Is it Christmas Eve?
I believe it was Christmas Eve.
They gathered together in one place, I believe, and had this incredible prayer time. Well, that's when I was at my lowest. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was nobody expected me to live through that,
right?
And I survived that. I survived that. And Dr. Halpin, one day I said to him, "Thank you so much for helping save my life." And he said, "I didn't do that." And he just go like this. And because he knew there was something beyond just his ability. He's a really great surgeon. Oh, he knew this was more than just physical skill, but it was part of that. So to me, it's all of that. God's grace is in all of that. So that's what I've learned.
What about you, Janene? Obviously, I think, I say obviously, maybe not, but like I said, he's unconscious a lot of this and things. You're having to sit in waiting rooms, waiting for doctors' reports and nurses' reports. How did your faith help carry you through this just incredibly emotionally draining ordeal?
Right. Well, it's true. He was unconscious for most of the really scary part of all of this. And having to watch someone literally almost die in front of you and being very helpless in that, it's a feeling I hope I never have to have again. And I wouldn't want anyone else to have to do that. And I don't know how anyone without faith can survive something like that, how they deal with things like that. And I wondered that a lot when we were going through all this and as I would walk through the hospital. So if I did not have a faith in God, I would not have been able to handle it. And I think he sustained me through this whole thing by using people, and sending people to me at certain times, just when I needed them. People would kind of show up when I needed them to be there, or call me when I needed them to be there for me. In particular, I remember going home at night, the nights that I did go home, because I spent I only think I spent about 15 nights all night in the hospital overall, because the rest of the time someone else would be there with him for me. But I remember going home at night. Sometimes it would be 3 or 4 in the morning, and funny, I'd go into my closet to get ready for bed, and that's when I would kind of break down, and I'd have these deep conversations with God, just expressing my fear, and I never felt abandoned or alone, that God left me with this. I always felt his presence, and I never felt that he would not approve of my fear or what I was going through at that time. He always reassured me and provided what I needed at the time to get through the next minute, the next hour, the next day. So he was very gracious to me, and that's what I'll always remember and rely on.
Well, I think you bring up a huge point, and I heard somebody say this a few years ago, and when you just mentioned that, it really resonated again with me. Sometimes I think we get overwhelmed because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen, 3 months down the road or 3 years down the road. And you just mentioned, you said, God, just give me enough grace, strength to get through the next hour,
right,
each day. Was that kind of...
That's exactly it, because that's the only way you could approach this, because it was sometimes a minute by minute, thing. Just, give me enough to get through this. Give me enough to get through this hour or this day. And he always did. Very faithful, and very loving. I just the way he orchestrated the whole thing and used it was, I think, very kind and loving. Just shows his nature, his kindness, and his goodness.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Amen.
Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about this line from a Helen Steiner Rice poem. The line is, never step into tomorrow. It's the same thing Jesus said in Matthew 6. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just focus on today. I'm not wired that way. I'm always stepping into tomorrow. So it's always a daily discipline for me just to stay focused. And in the hospital, when I started getting this place, oh my gosh, how many more days? That was paralyzing. And so I had to, try to retrain my thinking. Especially that last month, I was starting to get out and walk more. And I actually started reading some. And I did a little bit of journaling, although my handwriting, I had no motor control at first. So my notes, I can hardly read them. I didn't write that much, but there's a few things I wrote down. But there was one thing that happened, Greg, that was significant for me. One day, I was just having a bad day. It was in January, so I was very aware, but I was feeling very alone and just felt down. Every day there would be the hospital facilities would send in, people to kind of clean the room and things. One day, this older Hispanic lady walked in, and she walked in and looked at me, and she had this smile, and she came up to me like she knew me, and she started talking about how much Jesus loved me, and I was going to be okay. Wow. And she walked around and she kept cleaning, and she'd stop and come over and talk to me. And at one point, I'm pretty sure she grabbed my hand, and I'm not kidding you, because I didn't see that lady again for several weeks. I go, was that an angel? Yeah. I really didn't know, really, because I never saw her. Yeah. And then the week I was in ICU after my last surgery, she actually was in that room one day. She didn't really, I think, remember me, but I said, hey, I remember you. You came to my room. She kind of looked at me a little stunned. But it was like God sent, an angel in human form. It was just some words of encouragement. And she was just so, those kind of surprises of God's grace, just how it just kind of sometimes surprised me, just things that would happen. And one of the most emotional days of that, kind of a funny story, but also for me just an important one. One night, our friends kept our dog, Gus, while we were going through this. And one night they came to the hospital and walked in and had Gus on a leash. And I fell apart. I started weeping. And I had not cried like that before. I know it kind of sounds strange to say that, but it was just like, oh, this is wonderful, It was right before about a week before my surgery, I think, and I don't know. It just felt okay. Things are coming back to normal. Yeah, and it was a neat opportunity. A man showed up one night I'd never met before through a mutual friend. Said, "Once you go see him." He was a guy had esophageal cancer, so he had the same surgery. And he was giving me kind of the lowdown on what happened with him, and hey, you're going to be fine. Here's what you can expect. I've not seen him since, but it was a wonderful visit and very, very encouraging. So there's so many ways God was gracious, in ways it was just obvious for me. I didn't have to kind of, create it. It was just there. And so yeah, it's obviously it's something it changes you forever. I'll never be the same. I don't look at life the same anymore. I'll always talk about, I know I'm going to die one day, but I know that can happen just like that.
Guys, it's been great. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We're so glad that you're here to tell it. Thank you, Janene, just for the great job you did of supporting Lynn, and I know you're going to help a lot of people. So join us next time on Hope is Here.